do. It's season 2, it's in 30, 30, season 2.
Very, very good, very, very good, very, very good. Hello, everybody. I've got the perfect song, and 1, 2, 3, go.
I was a member of the Communist Party. I'm not a member of the Communist Party anymore, but I still consider myself very much a socialist. So we'll get to that later.
Let's go.
One of the reasons why the was a
Hey, I don't own the rights to this music, but I'm digging it. Nadine's digging it. Thank you, Dr. Nadine Figgencar. For those of you who newly are joining us, this is Michelle Ndegecello. Hot night.
It's a hot night. Let's talk about the sign.
Woo! Let's talk about it, people. Let's talk about it.
So singer.
Woo! Candid Conversations, 30 at 8:30. Come on in the room, y'all. Come on in the room. Okay, let's see. Let's start. Hi, people. I've missed you guys. What's going on? Good people? How you doing? Look at my panelists, just beautiful.
Hi, everybody.
That's beautiful. So that we end up, hi Janelle, what's going on? Hey everybody, come on in the room. Hit share, send messages over IG and Twitter, because I know y'all signed up, but I need to see more faces in the room. Hey, Sarah, what's going on? Welcome, everyone. Welcome to 30 at 8:30. Thank you for joining us this evening. And my name is Dr. Tanya Sharpe. I am the founder and director for the Center for Research and Innovation for Black Survivors of Homicide Victims, AKA the CRIB. 30 at 8:30, for those of you newly joining us, is a series brought to you by the CRIB. 30 at 8:30 is a weekly IG live show where we hold the space for 30 minutes every Wednesday night at 8:30 for the purpose of uplifting the voices of vulnerable populations who have disproportionately been impacted by structural inequities. In this space, this communal space, we have candid conversations about the violent impact of these structural inequities and their contributions to the overrepresentation of Black people impacted by homicide, state-sanctioned police violence, COVID-19, mass incarceration, inadequate housing, inadequate mental health and healthcare, etc., etc. Tonight, we are joining you via Zoom, and we have brought back some of our previous amazing, mic-dropping, prolifically profound guests. No pressure, people. No pressure. We're just talking to one another in the living room. Previous guests from seasons 1 and seasons 2 to focus on the impact of politics on our purposeful practice, exploring the impact of our political processes and leadership on our service to some of our most vulnerable communities. All right, y'all, gotta do a little housekeeping just to make sure we keep it right and tight. So hold please while I get to my slides. Shout out to Janelle Anderson once again for giving us some great slides. Hold please. You think I'd be used to this by now after teaching, but got to hit the share screen button, okay, here we are. And now you guys can see the background of beautiful picture of South Africa, one of my favorite places, but I digress. So tonight, we are going to go through a little bit of housekeeping. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items. So you know how to participate in the webinar. The webinar is being recorded and the video will be available to our website at www.the-crib.org/30-830. Again, that's www.the-crib.org/30-830.
We welcome you to revisit the content and share it with colleagues. You will have the opportunity to submit questions to our panel by typing your questions into the Q&A window, which can be accessed from the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation. We will collect these and do our very, very best to address as many as we can during the Q&A session, which will be held at the end of our discussion this evening. We encourage you to use the chat function to interact with our attendees, comment just as you would on Instagram Live by posting your comments to all panelists and attendees. And remember to be kind to one another. So for a moment, I'd like to take a pause, stop sharing my screen, and share with you some thoughts. Why I thought it was important to gather some of my very, very good friends and colleagues to have this important discussion. And I'm just gonna talk straight off the dome. While watching, many of you who are just joining us, I am a Black woman. I am a university professor. I am also a US citizen who currently resides in Canada. So I, like many others, were glued to the TV screen watching the results of the US election. To be honest with you, I felt like I was on some sort of psychotic roller coaster ride. And despite the fact, because what became clear to me is despite the fact that the person who currently holds office admitted lying, despite the fact that this person who occupies the White House admitted to or publicly said that Black and brown people resided from bleep bleep countries, despite the fact that he has put young children in cages, that the US citizens didn't just vote for him, but they doubled down. They doubled down on voting him into office. Now, the outcome was that Biden and Kamala, yes, and her name is Kamala Harris, won the election. We still only need to turn on our TV screen and see that in our DC city streets, there is a great deal of resistance, unrest, if you will. And so the second part of that joy and elation began with, it's time to get to work. We've got work to do. We've always had work to do, but we've got some serious work to do. The third thing I thought about, if I might be quite honest, is I was struck by the fact that when civil unrest occurs in other countries, other than the US, the response, the public outcry, if you will, is barely above a whisper. The last thing I was very clear about as I talked to my colleagues that you'll meet today is the world is watching. We are more connected than you may think. And so our responses need to reflect that unification. These are some of my opening remarks, but ladies and gentlemen, you are in for some good candid conversations tonight. These people are fire. They're some of my favorites. And so without further ado, I'm gonna introduce them so we can get started. All right, so Dr. Siddiqui is the Canada Research Chair in Population Health Equity and an Associate Professor at the Dalla Lana School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. Siddiqui, as I call her, is interested in understanding how societal conditions produce and resolve inequities in population health and human development across the lifespan. She is also a member of the CRIBS Global Community Research Network. Everyone, welcome Dr. Arjumand Siddiqui. Wild. All right, Kendra, Kendra Van de Water. Kendra is a licensed social worker in Philadelphia and co-founder of Youth Empowerment for Advancement Hangout, Yeah, Inc., in response to existing youth organizations' unwillingness to address community issues based on the needs of the individual, specifically teenagers. Yeah, Inc. is a startup teen-led nonprofit focused on empowering teens in Philly who have witnessed or engaged in violence to achieve the lives they want and simultaneously reduce youth and community violence. And she's also a former student of mine. I'm just going to just embarrass her a little bit. Yay, Kendra! Thank you for joining us. Dr. Massaquoi. Dr. Massaquoi is a subject matter expert in the area of race-based data collection in Canadian systems and is one of Canada's leading experts. Did I say leading? Leading experts in developing equity responsive organizations. Most notably, she spearheaded the development and served as the executive director of Women's Health in Women's Hands Community Health Center in Toronto, Canada, the only community health center in North America which provides specialized primary health care for Black and racialized women. Notisha is currently a postdoc at the Crib, and hot off the press, y'all, hot off the press. Dr. Massaquoi is the recent recipient of the Joe Leonard Award for her legacy of work ensuring Black women receive equitable health care. She is the first Black person to receive this award. Thank you, Notisha, for coming. Thank you so much. Dr. McGuffey is an associate professor of sociology and director of African and African diaspora studies at Boston College. His work highlights how race, gender, sexuality, and social class both constrain and create the choices survivors pursue in the aftermath of trauma. Two of his current projects focus on sexual trauma. One examines how gender, sexuality, and race shape parental responses to child sexual abuse, and the other investigates the social psychology of sexual assault survivors in the US, Ghana, South Africa, and Rwanda. He is also a member of the Crib's Global Community Research Network and a very, very dear friend. Welcome, Dr. Shawn McGuffey. Uppala, how you doing, Uppala? Uppala
Hey.
is a registered social worker and director of public policy at the Canadian Mental Health Association in Ontario. Uppala's advocacy, work, and published writings examine the impact of the lived experience of discrimination and racism on the health, mental health, and well-being of marginalized populations. She is also a member of the Crib's Global Community Research Network and community partner on several of our upcoming projects. Visit our website for more details on the innovative work we have come up with in service to survivors of homicide victims. Welcome, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so happy you are here tonight. Let's get to it. Shall we get to it? Let's get to it. You're like, yes. Okay, so you all can talk to me. I feel like, I mean, it's the boxes, Brady might talk.
Her mic's on, is it okay?
Okay, yeah, a little bit louder. Turn your mic up. I know you're not scared to turn the mic up, so just go ahead, yeah. It's like, don't be scared, don't be scared. All right, so the first question, I just wanna kind of toss it out to folks and just kind of like, let's just keep it moving. It's really a question regarding political leadership. When you think about, again, the most recent US election and the reactions of individuals, not just in the US, but throughout the globe, what does that tell us about the impact, or rather broader reach, of political leadership and governance? What does that tell us? Okay, I feel like
I could go.
Okay.
I'll go. So it's really interesting being a Canadian and being a voyeur, really, to the process that was happening in the States. So in Canada, we have three political colors, right? Blue in Canada is conservative, red is liberal, and then we also have a third party, which is a lefty, orange, left-leaning New Democratic Party. But no matter what our political colors, Canadians were so obsessed with the US election. Like it's in our all over the media, print media, news media, social media, radio, television, everything. And and let's face it, we've been really obsessed with Donald Trump for the last 4 years as well, right? And I was thinking and reflecting on this, and I think here's my take. So I think there is generally Canadians have a bit of an inferiority complex when it comes to Americans, right? Because Americans, they have the better paying jobs, right? And Americans have better weather. And let's face it, Americans also have better hip hop.
Yeah.
But there are two things that Canadians feel completely superior about. Number one, our universal healthcare system.
Right.
And number two, this collective belief that at least our leader is not Donald Trump. Right? And this is kind of a collective, like we have embraced this collective mythology that racism in our country is not as bad as in the US. Right? That police brutality is not as bad as in the US, that workplace harassment and violence is not as bad. And so this collective mythology has really prevented us and allowed us to stop examining what's happening in our own backyard, because it's so much easier to say, oh, that's happening in the States, let's just watch what's happening down there.
That's right.
And I think this is a lot of the conversations that I've been hearing and a lot of the things people are saying, because a lot of Canadians love to say, oh yeah, but at least we're better than the States on this regard. But that's been my observation as a Canadian.
Oh my gosh. Collective mythology. I like that. I love it.
Those things are two huge things.
Yeah.
Healthcare and Donald Trump. Like those are the biggest things.
Notisha, go ahead. You got a comment?
Yeah, I totally agree with Uppala. I'm sitting here in Canada and we're like, yeah, we got our healthcare and we don't got Donald Trump. But I'm originally from one of the bleep countries that he had targeted, and I'm also watching the commentary from an African perspective. And I mean, it's funny in some respects because it's like, maybe we should send some election observers to the US because they always like to come here and observe our elections. And, Trump is really outdoing himself, in terms of the perception of African dictatorship and us not being able to manage our countries effectively. And, people are quite shocked that the US is dealing with the same issues.
Right.
And, so the US can no longer throw stones anywhere or walk around the world with an air of superiority in terms of democracy and the greatest democracy in the world and all of the things that the US likes to hold up in terms of its superiority over other countries. And I think there's a bit of humility that Americans are going to have to grapple with moving forward. I think we also can't dismiss the damage that Trump has done, not just in the US, but the impact that it's had globally.
Thank you.
And,
that's right.
4 years of that kind of rule has impacted us in Canada severely, just even in terms of our trade agreements and our economy and all of those things that have been influenced, as well as the political rhetoric, which it hasn't had enough traction to take hold in Canada as it did in the US in terms of the far right rising up. But I think if Trump had another 4 years, we would have seen that same rhetoric rise in Canada. It gave license for the appearance of it. Yeah. So we just got a little taste. We're just not as, we're only 30 million people compared to your 300 million. So it just hadn't moved fast enough across the country. But we can't dismiss it. If Trump did anything, it was at least to expose that also exists in Canada, that racism is as bad as it is in the States, that the term Uppala used, the collective mythology, I really love that because that's been blown out of the water now. We're exposed. Our pants are down.
Yeah, finally. One person, and I know, Shawn, you probably have a comment, but Dr. Nadine Finnegan-Carr in the chat kind of picked up where you left off, where she says, is it collective mythology or is it the pathology of anti-Black racism that exists in both countries? Exactly what you're saying, exactly right. Yeah. Shawn?
Yeah, I think one thing that Trump has done is to show the interconnectedness of us all, because we're seeing horrific ripple effects across the globe, whether it be through what's going on with the UN. I do also some work with the Sudan and how that's been, because of his administration's approach to crimes against humanity, that's been impacted. We see, so we're all interconnected. So when you have someone like him in office, when you think about all the climate issues that are going across the globe, really, because of his handling and his administration. So it's all interconnected. And I would say, though, even though I was one of the people who was shocked when he was elected 4 years ago, I do think, whereas the globe may be surprised with the amount of racism in the US, I think a lot of people of color are like, yeah, we are racist. We knew that. I think white Americans are shocked. I think some of us were shocked that he got elected, but we weren't shocked that, there's a lot of racism in the United States and that half the country wish a lot of us didn't exist. Like we knew that part of it, right? But it does show, also going back to what Notisha was saying, is that, the limitations of our democracies. I always tell my students that, we're not really, we're a republic, we're not a democracy. I mean, if we were actual democracy, Trump never be president because he lost the popular vote. In a democracy, that would not happen. That happens because of the Electoral College, which is deeply based in a racist system, because those Southern slave owners wanted to make sure that they had a voice in the government. So, I always say, yes, it shows the limitations of our so-called democracy. I just say, we're a republic. And because if we were a true democracy anyway, at least on the federal level, I can think we can make an argument that we're a democracy on the state level, but on the federal level, we are not a democracy. Otherwise, Trump wouldn't be president. The person with the fewest votes does not win in a democracy, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I think what it does do, especially, is that it shows our dedication to property. If you're studies settler colonialism, I mean, really, the Electoral College is about owning Black bodies, right? And this connection to ownership and property rooted in anti-Blackness. And we're still seeing the ramifications of the US's obsession with capitalism and property, the foundation of the Electoral College. And we're still seeing the racial implications of that college and the fact that someone like Donald Trump is elected president.
100%.
He lost fewer votes.
Whoa. And this is just
snaps
the audience. This is question one. This is question one. Okay. Siddiqui, do you have anything to say? You want to bring us home, or you want to wait? You want to?
Dude, I think they said it all. I don't know if I.
So he did. Can I even add? I feel like, first of all, I'm embarrassed to even be living in the US, okay? So do we need to move to Canada? But
yes, you're all welcome. You're all welcome.
I feel like I have been really disconnected from watching Donald Trump on TV or engaging in his conversations, because it just makes me so angry. But I think the biggest thing too for me is that, well, also Joe Biden owes Philadelphia everything. But I mean, that's another conversation. But the fact that he still has so much support is terrifying. And I agree with what Shawn had said when it's no, the racism is not new. We knew that this has been here before. But also I feel like people are more understanding and aware that the cities they may live in, like outside of those small pockets, are hateful people. And it's becoming more overt, and people are dealing with more things out in the open. And I don't even know how we change it. How do we change it? It's scary. It really is scary. But I think more people are paying attention. I think young people are more engaged in politics than they've ever been before.
Right.
I think that, you know, even though I'm cynical of a lot of things, I still think we're in a place where people are starting to push back against the government. And we're in a moment that I'm glad to see that. I mean, I know like bad things are happening, but at the same time, I feel like it's necessary and people are standing up against oppressive systems, and it's super important.
Thank you for that, Kendra. Well said, well said. I wanna move to policy. And so Siddiqui, this is you, I'm looking at you in particular. When I think about policy, again, our political processes that develop policy, what are the best approaches to using data to help inform governing bodies about the importance and their responsibility to serve some of our most vulnerable Black and Brown communities? What are the best approaches to using data to really kind of cement this?
So I don't know if I've ever thought about it as what the best approach is, because really the best approach is to have evidence and to listen to it. So I actually have a different attitude toward this, which is I don't think the data actually does move much. Like, I don't think the data collection and analysis, I think it should still happen. I think we should know the truth about our societies. We should have a public record of what's happening. We should have access to data to allow us to understand like how policy changes result in changes for people. But if you ask me like the question as is in terms of like, how does it help? Like, what's the best way to make the data move people to enact change? I just don't think it works that way. I think it's true that if you don't collect data on people, it's virtually impossible for anything to change because you become, in budgetary terms, invisible. But even when you collect it, it's very difficult to look at history and say, you know what, when we collect data and we produce evidence, it creates change. Maybe, but a lot of times it doesn't.
Siddiqui, I actually agree with you, which is why I wanted to kind of open this question, open this door, because I recently had sort of this conversation, as you know, with Stats Canada's recent new releasing of 2019 data on homicide victims for the first time, tracking the number of Black homicide victims in Canada. Let me say that again, for the first time. That data was just released. And I was like, okay, that's a good beginning. It's a step in the right direction, but there needs to be some sort of contextualization around the experience of folks. You know, how do they function? How do they get up every day? What do they need? What services are they accessing? You know, all of those things. So I agree, the data in partnership with some understanding of the social cultural context in which these phenomenons occur has to be a part of the discourse. 100%. Thank you for that. Uppala, what do you do when data isn't enough? So we're talking about that. What do you do when data is enough? How do you work with political leadership to support policies that are necessary for Black and Brown people to survive? Right? We you know, Arjumand has said data alone is not enough. We've talked about contextualization, but then how do we package that in a way that sort of moves the needle?
Yeah, I know this is a little dangerous to say in front of a whole group of academics, but what I would say is that research and evidence, it's kind of useless unless you find the right language to communicate it in.
Okay,
right? Like it really is, right? Research for the sake of research is useless. And we know that, for example, the journey of knowledge translation from research all the way to practice takes about 15 years before the uptake happens. So it's really important that we find the right language and the right vocabulary to speak to the particular audience. And with regards to politics, you have to find the right vocabulary to fit with the leadership of the day. And so if, like, I'll give an example. The previous government we had in Ontario, when it talked about healthcare, it was, healthcare at the right place at the right time. That was their slogan, right? But this new government, when newer government that we have, which is a conservative government, their whole slogan is ending hallway medicine, ending hallway healthcare. So you have to reframe your argument to show that what you're working on is actually going to end hallway medicine. And when your vocabulary or your reframing of the discussion doesn't work, then you actually have to find people that the current leadership is listening to and wants to listen to. And sometimes that means partnering with some unusual suspects. And one of those things, one of the strategies that have worked for the mental health and addiction sector is to partner with the police. So right now, the Conservative government in Ontario, they very much are supportive of the police. They get behind, policing issues, and they're listening to policing leaders. And what a really effective strategy that our sector has employed is to actually partner with those policing leaders. So for example, about 10 years ago, the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, they put out a public statement saying that mental health is not a policing issue, it's a healthcare issue. So we don't need to do anything about it. And so with that statement, a lot of us leaders in the mental health and addiction sector actually sought them out and said, actually, it is your issue, because this is how we can show you evidence about how suicide is impacting your police officers, how post-traumatic stress is impacting your police officers, and also how people in crisis are calling you for support because you're the only 24-hour service available. And so 10 years later, you're really not going to find a policing leader that says mental health is not my business, right? And so we've actually had to go to the table in partnership with police with the evidence. And they have been able to influence government to talk about and advocate really for funding for mental health crisis, to a point that just yesterday there was a big funding announcement specifically for mental health partnerships that involve the police in the province. So I think, first you really have to find the right vocabulary for the political leadership. And when your language doesn't work, then you have to find a speaker that will be able to deliver your message to government in a way that they understand.
I jump in?
Sure.
Quick? Yeah, so I'm speaking here not from an academic, but from, I was board chair for social justice org for 6 years, and I've been on other social justice organizations here in Boston. And what we found is that it's like, like 3 ways in which to impact policy. And I'll just use, because a lot of the youth programming in Boston, at least on a political level, was not addressing queer people of color. They were addressing queer youth, but not queer youth of color and their specific needs. And what we found was like this 3 parts. One, to get policy was, you need to have a language, you need to be able to communicate, you did actually have to have data. They didn't necessarily listen to it, but they weren't even let you in the door if you at least have some sort of data. And unfortunately, oftentimes some letters behind your name, even though from my experiences, most of the grassroots people who knew more than anyone else in the room. So there was that part of it. And 2, it really took protests. Like protests is what we got, like we shut down gay pride on more than one occasion, like literally shut it down, like stopped it in its tracks. We protesting at the courthouse, because people get tired of seeing you after a while because you're bringing bad press to them, right? When you have, and so like when you have youth who've been kicked out of their homes and these policies are not addressing their issues, and the politicians are saying that we're progressive, then why do we have all these queer youth of color on the streets? Then like that's bad imaging for them. So like protesting and coalitional protesting is important. So like we didn't just partner with queer people, the disabled community, ableism was part of our protesting, right? We had mothers who were working, who lost their children to violence, right? A lot of them were coming with us. So I think, I think that's part of it. And then you have the nuts and bolts, boring institutional things that go on. Like there are certain policies, there are certain legislators in place that can tweak things or change this one little thing where we can't say we're going to target queer youth of color, but if we change this little thing here, we can find ways to fund X, Y, Z. Right. And so I think it's really a combination of language is important, data is important, but I really cannot overemphasize protests. Like protest is really important. I think one thing we find in the US as well with the Black Lives Matter movement, the Say Her Name movement, like we're actually questioning the idea of reallocating police funds to other places now because of protests. Like that didn't just happen because police officers like, okay, yeah, we're gonna take some money. It's like, no, protests were happening, and it's not national, different states are doing their own thing, but it's because of concentrated protests, people taking to the streets saying, we've had enough. Yeah. We are demanding change. We brought you the data, you didn't listen to that. We've changed the language, we didn't listen to that. We've done everything you've told us to do, and we're gonna shut stuff down in a pandemic.
You can say it.
Right? In a pandemic. And not only are we doing all this, we're doing this in a pandemic. Yeah. And it says, so you are going to listen to us whether you want to, because we've done everything else. We changed the language, we talked to this person, and things are not moving fast for us. Let's shut this stuff down. Yeah.
What's interesting,
I think it's a combination of all these different players.
Yeah.
I don't think there's my way I think change works is not one way. It's multiple ways. There's multiple ways. You have to do a little bit of this, you have to do a little bit of this, a little bit of that.
Yes, I think the thread of connection that you all are both saying actually too is the fact that social capital, however you slice it, whether it's accessing your social capital and knowing how to use it strategically to move the needle, to maximize the greatest potential to be successful. And I think that's really what you all are talking about. I want to stay with this and kind of pick up a little bit on where we began regarding sort of research to practice, right? Uppala, in terms of what you said, in terms of, there may be researchers in the room, but I have a tendency to think, when I think about purposeful practice, right, particularly at the crib, I really think about my practice in multiple ways, right? So one of which is the practice we are all aware of in terms of delivering services to our clients, but there's also another element of practice that is the practice of research in service to others. And I talk to a lot of junior faculty majority who are junior faculty of color, about these feelings that they often have, that they've decided to be a researcher in academic settings where there aren't many people that look like them. And they've decided to do this in service to others, but there seems to be a disharmony, a lack of appreciation of the way and angle in which they go about doing their service through research. And so I thought that was really profound in this part of the conversation, because when we think about the impact of policy in terms of delivery of services, in terms of funding resources, that also affects research dollars as well. So I want to kind of open this question up, and Notisha, I'm going to toss it to you first. When we think about political leadership in particular and how that impacts policy, we understand that many times those policies also impact our ability to conduct our research for and with the people we've been called to serve. So how might researchers engage in a political process that allows them to proactively develop and support policy that not only impacts their ability to conduct research, but impacts the lives of those they are in service to? Shawn has touched upon this a little bit in terms of different ways, but I'm just wanted to get your focus, your thoughts, sorry.
Yeah, the first thing we have to focus on is the separation of state and research. We just watched it in the US. We're watching it now with COVID in particular. The researchers were not allowed to do the thing that they needed to do, which is save lives, just because of political interference. here in Canada, we had to beg for race-based data when we knew that racialized communities were going to be overrepresented in COVID. And we had to use humiliation, literally, to embarrass the government to collect that data. And when they collected it, so said, so done. Black people were overrepresented in the COVID statistics. 9% of the population in Toronto is Black, but we make up the highest percentage of COVID cases, 22%. But, you know, when politics is involved in stopping us from actually doing our work, from actually doing our service, then that is something that we have to be politically engaged in as researchers. We have to fight back against that. You know, I know we were just talking about the collection of data and the use of data. I think once we move data out of the institution and put it in the hands of the communities that are most impacted by the information in that data, it becomes a tool. It becomes a tool of survival for us. If I think about Black communities, the level of invisibility that we as Black people have in Canada can only be mitigated by data. We have to have that data and understand its usefulness. And when we do get the little bits of data, it actually validates the experiences that we're having and makes us feel somewhat normal and sane that, you know, we're not just making this stuff up. It is what it is. And here's the data to prove it. And here's the data that I can actually use to go and make my case for policy change, for more resources, whatever it is. But, you know, you have, as a researcher, if I think about myself, I wake up every day in the service of Black people. So my research has to have intent. I'm not interested in what my goal is, what my objectives are, what my outcomes are. What is my intent? And what is the commitment that my research is going to make to Black people? And we all have to make a decision as researchers. We can't just neutrally do research for the sake of research, not in this time, not in the time that we're in, not what we just went through for the last 4 years, not what we just watched, and not just the US. The US, the numbers make it more pronounced in terms of COVID, but the impact that politics has played on the ability for governments to actually service its people, to keep us safe and keep us well. And we now, I think, as researchers have an obligation to not just stand by and be neutral when it comes to politics. Our research has to reflect our values, and it actually has to push back against these repressive regimes that we're dealing with.
I mean, I just,
Real.
right? Oh, I forgot my, wait a minute, here it is. Sorry, Notisha. Here we go. Did the hand. I'm all over that. That was just, hello.
I'm like, what was that? And the other thing we have to remember as researchers is have fun.
Yes. You gotta laugh to keep from crying. I mean, well said. I couldn't have said it better. Any other comments about that? You're like, yeah, no. It's like, no, I got that. You good? Okay. Kendra, I wanna move on to you. So many people have expressed more than ever why it is important to vote, which is an odd question for me because for many Black and Brown communities, we know how valuable the representation of our voices are in the political process, enabling us to meet the needs of our communities. And if you don't know, Google Stacey Abrams. Okay. But I digress. Kendra, how do we remain purposeful in our practice? I think about our most recent conversation about your frustration and desire to keep kids safe, particularly with the murder of Walter Wallace. And so I just wanted to kind of think about when the weight of political leaders who aren't hearing us, the weight of policies that were not created for us and by us continues to assault our communities and often inhibit our ability to be of service.
how do we remain purposeful in our practice? In other words, how do you do what you do? Because I've been checking in and talking to you about you kind of addressing those very same issues. So,
Woo, you just described my whole life. But so Walter Wallace was murdered a block from where I live in Philadelphia. And even with Philly's really high rate of just homicides, shootings, like we have almost 440 homicides right now. We have almost 1,900 reported shooting victims, with over 1,400 of them being Black men. So Philly is in a very, very, very dark place. And politicians are, coming out everywhere. And so for me, it's, we get a lot of calls from politicians. We get a lot of calls from different people who are very removed from what we do. And it is frustrating. They want to use you. They want to say, oh, hey, we're about to have this emergency community meeting. Can you speak? And so all of these things weigh on you. They weigh on you because people don't listen to you. They don't listen to the community. And I think for us and for me, I always remember why I'm doing something. Like Notisha hit it right on the head, when you have to have intent, and we don't do this work just to do it. But also remembering to always be rooted in your community and show up, I think is a big thing. And for me, like, I can show you better than I can tell you. The work speaks for itself, and you have to remember why you're doing what you're doing. You have to remember your mission and the people you're trying to help. I tune all of that stuff out. And I think even it used to make me super angry. Now I'm like, these people are irrelevant. And we have to remember that our community work, it will elevate. It will elevate. It shows, because at the end of the day, the politicians are not subject matter experts. And the community is going to call on you. And when you're accessible, the community calls on you. They don't call the politicians. So I think it's remembering why you do something. It's remembering who your community is. I have no problem. Like, we went to the block up the street was calling us right after Walter Wallace Jr. was shot 14 times. I knew everybody on that scene. And guess what? They knew nobody in the community. They couldn't get any answers. The community was pissed off, and they were all just standing there looking like, oh, I don't know what's going on, because you're not in this community every day. So I really think the relationships are important, but the biggest thing is showing up. You have to show up, and you have to be consistent in what you do. And we got a lot of pushback for even the young people we work with those same officers every single day in our program. And so we had to put out a statement that we will not be working with them until we have serious conversations. Why do we run these groups, and why do we do the work that we do? If you're going to come into our community, in which we work with you every day in, and that's how you respond to our neighbors. And so why continue to do that if you're not taking that seriously? So we got a lot of pushback for that, but also a lot of support. But young people are upset, and they said the same thing. They were like, we run all these groups with these police officers. Like, why do they think that that's okay? It's not okay. So no matter what people throw at us and the policies, we show them different. We go to court every day where these policies are pushing back around, you tell young people who are released from jail to get a job, but you don't allow them to go anywhere because they're on house arrest. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So showing the courts, showing the judges the work that you're doing, and why a lot of times they're disconnected, and connecting those dots for them, because they're far removed and they don't understand what's going on. So speaking in their language, but also advocating for them. So then when you keep showing up and you keep being consistent, they're like, okay, they're not going away. They're showing us these different things. And then that often changes a lot of things that happen. So even if it's on a smaller level, that one person situation can change. And then we can keep coming back for the other people. and larger changes usually happen, whether it's within the courts or, through probation. And that's just a very minimal example, but definitely consistency and showing up and doing your work.
Here, 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 here. So very proud of the work that you're doing. So I wanted to kind of open up the floor for anybody to piggyback on what Kendra said.
Yeah, can I just say, Kendra, can you run for office, please? I watched your episode on 30 and 830, and I thought the same thing. We need you.
You know what's crazy?
You to run.
That has been in my goal sheet, and as the years go on, I'm like, I don't think I want to anymore. But
you got my vote.
On the maybe list because I see how they operate, right? I would be fired like day 3. Like I'm not.
but look, you got backup. You got around the world backup using.
People ask me it all the time.
Social capital.
I'm like, why are you asking me that, Uppala? No.
Well, I think one thing that's interesting is that we need people like us, and I don't just mean racialized people, but people with this drive for change in those positions, right? And we need people like us to learn the game so that we can dismantle the system. And I think that piece is so important because oftentimes we're trying to change a system we don't quite understand. We don't understand the ins and outs of it. And so we need a seat at that table to shift it. And I think this is why it's so important that we get behind those racialized people who actually do volunteer and take up these positions that are so impossible, right? And that we're just putting on a suit and showing up every day is hard work, right? But we need these individuals to learn the system so that we can benefit from that knowledge to dismantle the system.
It's true. Are you gonna run if I run?
Yep. Whoa! You heard it here first, y'all. At 8:30. Politicians.
All right, Kendra.
Yep, yes, sir. All right. Final question. Then I want to open it up to audience members. So now that we all know what we know, and we know what we are not looking for, what are you looking for? What are you looking for in a political leader? To best support your ability to maximize your potential to be in service to others? What are you all looking for?
Kendra.
We're looking for Kendra.
Yeah.
For me, it's relationships. If you cannot relate to the people you are serving, which a lot of people can't, and to me, it's not rocket science, but that is everything. Just going around and talking to people. People need to be heard, and nobody is heard. So as a political leader, you have to talk to people, get to know people, understand people's issues, but also just be a person. I think sometimes people are so, trying to be strategic in a way that doesn't work because they want to look a certain way instead of focusing on the people. We are not people driven, and we really, really should be.
Excellent point. Excellent point. Others?
Yeah, I can jump in quick. One thing that I really hope this administration does is that, I'm not sure if people know, but, because I am before I was director of African Diaspora Studies, I was in charge of the research methods curriculum. So I'm always following what's going on in research methods. And one thing I hope they do is, Trump didn't appoint someone to I know it's nerdy, but the White House Office of Science and Technology for 18 months. And now, as of last month, unless something has changed, they still have yet to produce anything in that. And he's not even president anymore, right? Technically he's president, but he's on his way out. And so we need someone in that position because it really shapes what's available financial wise in order to conduct research for your communities, right? So one thing I hope that the Biden-Harris administration does is put someone who's competent in the House Office of Science and Technology, because that will greatly shape how we do research. Because the only thing that they were actually doing anything on was AI, artificial intelligence, and quantum information science. That's all they were working on. But as far as like social science research or COVID research, I mean, things that you would think would be really important at the moment. So hopefully putting someone who can actually use that office to go back to ways in which we can do research that can be helpful and beneficial to people outside of AI and outside of quantum information. Not saying we shouldn't do AI and quantum information science, but there's a lot of other research that needs to be done, particularly those that deal with like, COVID, how to handle police brutality. There's actually a science behind that. You know, there's research out there that can be done. He got out of the Paris Climate Accord, getting back into that, because that has disproportionately impacts on our communities as well. Like, we need someone who's going to be able to make sure that science is respected again, because it's not respected. And we need to also, something I always go back to, elevate social science on par with natural science and seeing how they can work together. Because if we really want to solve COVID, we have to figure out, and talk about the ways it's disproportionately impacting Black and Indigenous communities who are dying over and over again. And just understanding a vaccine is not going to solve that problem, right? We have to talk about the social science and the research, getting involved, like Kendra said, with the community to get accurate research on how to best do that. And then we can just go down the line. Healthcare, the healthcare disparities are horrible in conjunction to the ways it impacts vulnerable populations. And also like those with preconditions, which are also most likely to be Black and brown and Indigenous people. So we need to find a way under this new administration to, one, respect science and elevate social science on par with the natural science to solve these problems, especially these problems that disproportionately impact Black, brown, and Indigenous people.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you.
Sounds like a job for you, Shawn.
Oh, okay. It was just toss the baton.
I mean, he gave a perfect job description for himself. He was so excited. He needs to apply. They need to appoint you.
We've got some questions.
If I can add to what Shawn is saying, I think I 100%. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, like, 100% agree with what both Kendra and Shawn have said. And I think for me, the importance of political leadership is someone that not only understands and believes, but works from a health and all policies approach. Like someone that understands that, economic policy has an impact on our health, that social policy, education policy, criminal justice policy has an impact on our mental health. Because COVID has demonstrated, it has proven over and over again over the last 10 months that a healthcare issue has the power to disrupt our economy, to disrupt our education system, our criminal justice system, and really topple our way of life. So someone who doesn't understand the importance of health, like, they can't be in a position of leadership. And I think for me, like, the leader I want and the leader I think we need has to put health as the number one priority. And unfortunately, I don't see any leaders doing that right now.
We as the voters have to hold them accountable. Canada just came out of a conservative government, and basically you went to sleep for that entire period because no research was being funded. Forget about research in gender and women's issues. You could not get any research that looked at LGBTQ communities funded. Very limited research that actually addressed racialized communities either. So, we forget so quickly how conservative governments, and I'm speaking from a Canadian perspective, can influence and stifle research. And we don't have all the private donations and funders and things like that in Canada. We're so heavily dependent on government funding for research. Yeah. It has to become a political issue in terms of voting. We have to hold our politicians accountable. And so the public has to be also educated to understand no, we need to put that on the agenda so that we know where you stand in terms of research before I put you in office.
Well said, well said. I want to at least get to one question in the chat. And it basically, in some, they're asking, how do we combat complacency? I think now that they stated, I think now that Trump is out of office, those who were posting black squares on IG are starting to feel complacent now. That Biden and Harris have been elected, similar to how people assumed we live in a post-racial society when Obama was elected. So how do we combat complacency? How do we still, I remember when the results came in, I was surprised at how much weight I was holding. And I felt an instant release, not thinking that, okay, now we can stop, but just for 4 years, I felt like I was holding my breath. And so I think there's this interesting thing that's happening to folks being traumatized and in the trenches so much that, or exhaustion, or I don't know, coupled with complacency. So I guess I'm rephrasing the person's question, but how do we combat that?
Is he gone? Like, you haven't seen him leave yet.
Is he going to
You're all acting like
Excellent
he just
point.
get up and walk out of there.
What's his favorite line? Nobody has ever seen anything like it before.
But how do we
true.
continue to stay in the trenches and fight and continue to strategize and continue to use our social capital and continue to protest? Because we ain't done.
No, we're not done. And these issues they have not changed. I think that was a good question, because for me, like, yes, we had to vote Donald Trump out, but also it was not a celebration for me. Thinking about how the country just has been and how, I'm still Black every day and I'm still going to have to deal with these same things, but also that the people who we've seen run this country, have they run it in a way that has been beneficial for all of us in the past? Have they addressed all of the things that we continue to talk about? And while, yes, they may be better in some ways, are they going to be worse in other ways? Like, I am afraid of Joe Biden and Kamala, to be honest. And I don't want to celebrate, I know they have apologized for things, but they have put our people in prison for how many years now? Like, I am terrified of that. And I think about even with gun violence, like, yes, their gun laws and their ticket has been super strong, but I'm afraid too, because I know that 90% of our young people in our detention center have gun cases. So does that mean they'll automatically all go to prison because of some mistakes that they've made, or for carrying a gun for safety and protection? So these are the things that I think about. And I definitely think people have to continue their work and remember that, it's still a fight every single day.
Siddiqui, I saw you nodding. Thank you for that, Kendra. Thank you. I saw you nodding viciously.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is the answer to the complacency. I think people who are particularly working class, Black and brown people, they know that the struggle's not over. They probably barely let out a sigh of relief, because who got voted into office is not the Messiah. And I mean, I guess the other answer to your earlier question about what do you want in a political leader, I think part of the problem is this search for these individuals that we're going to invest in as if they are the answer. Even in the case of someone like Stacey Abrams, I mean, I've heard a lot of people say what's getting lost in the shuffle is the amount of community organizing that underpins someone like her coming in. So I think, that's the backdrop, is not having politicians, I think Kendra said this earlier, it's just not having politicians who are as connected to the grassroots, particularly after they get into office. So they have to be able to talk to them, but also be buttressed by them in every way. And I think that's the furthest thing from what we see of the people in office. They've just announced who they are intending to select for their cabinet, and it's not good at all. So yes, we could take a breath from Trump. There's no question it's different than Trump, but it's not good stuff. I mean, it wasn't under Obama either. It hasn't been for really any president we've had. So it's very difficult to look at the broader sweep of leadership and see anything that remotely resembles, people who are acting in the interest of Black people.
Mhm. So
I'm gonna take a slightly different approach. I think that, at least for me, I think it's okay for us to exhale. Like, this was
there's no question.
This last 4 years was rough AF. I mean, it
Totally
was.
agree, but I'm just saying that I think there's working class people who are not going to exhale that much. That's
yeah,
I agree, but I agree. I do, but I do think that, like, because I think we talk about, get back to complacency. I think one of the ways in which you help fight complacency is part of it is self-care, and part of the self-care is saying, okay, let's take this as a victory. No matter how small it is, it's still a victory. We show when we show up in our numbers, we can get someone out of office who says that it's okay for the white supremacists to stand down and stand by. That we have someone who put on his ticket one of the most homophobic political as vice president. I like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris got a lot of issues, but I don't think they're going to try to take away healthcare from Americans. I don't think they're going to put people in Supreme Court who are going to undo LGBT rights. They're not going to, they're not going to do a lot of those things. Does that mean that they're still not wedded to empire and settler colonialism and a whole host? Of course they are. There's no doubt. But I think that a part of fighting complacency is taking the wins and saying, this was a win. Let's take a break. Let's go out in the street. Well, don't go out in the streets because we got COVID, but go and hang out in your bedroom, jump up and down, play some trap music, do what you got to do to get your best. And say, whoo, let me exhale, but recognize that this is just a break. This is just a break, and we have to move on because, I mean, Kamala and Joe Biden's record, especially thinking about empire, both in the US and outside the US, is not very good. However, I feel like we need to recognize we've at least stopped the massive hemorrhaging, right? It's not going to heal us, but we stopped the massive hemorrhaging. At least I hope. I mean, I'm hoping that Kamala and Biden are not going to be as bad as Trump. Right?
And I also think that both of you, Siddiqui and Shawn, have kind of really uplifted. And Siddiqui, I like what you said in terms of the fact that, we need to stop looking to one person to be the Messiah. And I think all of you have said that in very different ways, that to address complacency and a pathway forward is really about us using our resources, our collective power, and being able to hold folks accountable and possibly even shifting the structure of our government with not just one person having so much power. I mean, I don't know, but just maybe it's an opportunity to reimagine or reshift, refocus, redesign, but there's got to be something that we can't keep doing the same thing. Our Siddiqui is what I'm taking from your message. We cannot keep doing the same thing. Voting someone in office and saying, yay, rah, rah, we won, we can breathe, but this we got to do something differently.
And also, I think the other part of that is, I think there is a whole suite of people who aren't even close to complacent, not even close, because their lives are affected by this. I mean, that's kind of my point, is that yes, we can take a break and breathe and celebrate, no question. But I don't think we actually have to worry about complacency, because there's a whole lot of people who are so affected by what will continue. And you see them in BLM, in earlier Occupy movements. I mean, all over the place. So we know they're not complacent, because they know how this stuff affects their daily lives.
Yeah, well said. And on that note, Crib community, special guest, thank you so much for joining us this evening. And again, to my esteemed panelists who I have come to know and love as dear friends, thank you so much for joining us this evening. As always, everyone, from our crib to yours, stay safe and keep well. Good night.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Love you.
I'm coming to visit after lockdown.
After
We're on lockdown till January 1st.
I'm bringing pie when I come. So.
Pecan, key lime, and apple, please.
All three. I got you.
Pecan, key lime, apple. Got it.
Bye.
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 Do we hang up?
Stop that. Stop that. Yeah. Out here, I'm chatting the noise. Move too quick.